Welcome to The Explainer. Today, especially for all you students of political science and history out there, we are diving deep into one of the most powerful forms of government ever created, absolute monarchy. We're going to break down how it all worked in Europe, and then, to see its modern legacy, we'll connect it to South Asian history. That's why you'll see some key terms in Nepali script as we go.
All right, let's just think about this for a second. Imagine a leader where their word is literally law. There's no constitution, no parliament, no court that can tell them no. How could a system like that even exist? Well, for centuries, it wasn't just a thought experiment, it was the reality for millions of people.
So to really get our heads around how a single person could hold so much power, we first have to clearly define the system that absolutely perfected this kind of authority.
And that system is called absolute monarchy, or you'll just hear it called absolutism. Basically, it's a government where one ruler, the monarch, has unlimited power. There are no checks and balances, no one to stop them. They are, for all intents and purposes, the ultimate authority in the land.
Okay, so how do you justify that kind of power? For centuries, the answer was a really powerful idea called the divine right of kings. The concept was simple, but its effect was huge. The king was chosen by God to rule. That meant the king answered only to God, not to the people, not to anyone on earth. It took the monarch out of the messy world of politics and put them on a sacred pedestal. And this quote right here from the French Bishop Bossuet just hits the nail on the head. He argued that kings were basically God's managers here on earth. So think about what that means. If you rebelled against the king, you weren't just committing treason against the state, you were committing a sin against God himself.
But having a powerful idea is one thing. Actually putting it into practice and holding on to all that power, that's a whole other challenge. So how did these monarchs turn theory into reality?
Well, let's meet two of the heavyweights of absolute monarchy. On the left, you've got King Louis XIV of France, famously known as the Sun King. And on the right, we have Peter the Great of Russia. Both were absolute masters of power, but they went about it in very different ways. Louis XIV is kind of the poster child for absolutism. His famous line, "I am the state," pretty much says it all. But his real genius was how he handled the powerful nobles who might challenge him. He made them live at his incredible Palace of Versailles, where he could keep an eye on them. He turned his potential enemies into courtiers who were too busy competing for his attention to plot against him. It was a brilliant political move.
Now, Peter the Great took a different approach. He used his absolute power like a hammer to forge a new Russia. He saw his country as old-fashioned and was determined to modernize it. So he took power away from the old nobles and the church, built a whole new government, and forced everyone with land to serve the state. His goal was to make Russia a major European power, and he wasn't going to let anything or anyone get in his way.
So, while absolutism is hitting its peak in France and Russia, over in England, a completely different idea about how to run a country is starting to take shape. And this set up a major clash of political philosophies.
And this chart just lays out the two competing ideas perfectly. On one side, the ruler is the law. On the other side, the ruler has to follow the law. And that's not just a minor difference, right? That's a revolutionary shift from power coming from God to power being limited by a constitution and shared with the people.
This alternative is what we call a constitutional monarchy. In this kind of system, the monarch is the head of state, a really important symbol of the nation. But they don't actually run the government. The old saying goes, the monarch reigns but does not rule. The real political power lies with an elected parliament. Now, England's path to get there was long, and it was messy. We're talking centuries of struggle. It started way back in 1215 with the Magna Carta, the first real attempt to limit the king's power. It led to a brutal civil war, and finally the Glorious Revolution, which once and for all established that Parliament, not the king, was in charge.
But this whole struggle between absolute power and limited power isn't just some dusty old European story. To see how these exact same ideas played out much, much more recently, let's jump forward to the 21st century and look at the incredible story of what happened in Nepal.
For 240 years, Nepal was ruled by the Shah dynasty. That is an incredibly long time. And just like those European kings we talked about, the king's power was tied directly to religion. The king was seen by many as an incarnation of the Hindu god Vishnu, which gave him this immense spiritual and cultural power.
But as you can see from this timeline, even that divine power started to fade. In 1990, a massive people's movement forced the king to accept a constitution. That was a huge first step.
Then, in 2001, a horrific royal massacre didn't just kill the royal family, it completely shattered the sacred image of the institution. And by 2008, after another huge movement, the 240-year-old monarchy was officially gone.
And here's the really crucial part. Unlike a lot of old monarchies that were toppled by wars or violent revolutions, Nepal's monarchy was ended by a largely peaceful, popular movement. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets, demanding a democratic republic. That shows a profound shift in how people thought about power.
So, after all that history, what can we take away from this? What are the big lessons from the rise and fall of absolute rulers that still matter to us today?
Okay, let's boil it all down. First, divine right was a genius way to protect a ruler's power because it turned any political challenge into a religious crime. Second, the great alternative that came along was constitutionalism, the idea that even the king has to follow the rules. And third, the bigger story here is a global shift toward popular sovereignty. That's the radical idea that true power comes from the people, not from God or because of who your parents were.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. Sure, the classic, crown-wearing, absolute monarch is pretty much a thing of the past. But that tension, that struggle between unchecked power and limited power is still happening all over the world, every single day. The crowns may be gone, but the fundamental questions about who should have power and how much they should have are as relevant as ever.